My name is Chris. I was born in Texas, but my family came from Poland, a country I've never seen. Yet somehow it lives in every silence of our house. My mother says we brought our faith across the ocean, but I think what really crossed was fear. I grew up in a 2-bedroom house at the edge of a small town where the wind carried dust instead of snow. We went to church every Sunday, even when we couldn't afford gas. My father kept the family Bible on the table like a piece of furniture. He never opened it, but it was always there, like a warning. Don't speak, don't question, don't shame the family. From the outside, we looked like good people. A clean house, white curtains, polished shoes. Inside, everything echoed. My mother's voice was small. My father's temper was the weather, and my grandfather, the man everyone called holy, was the storm we were told to thank for rain. When I was 6, I learned what it meant to be afraid of love. It didn't happen in a dark alley. It happened in daylight, inside our own living room. The curtains half closed, the TV humming softly. He called me Little Angel. He said he wanted to show me a movie that was for grown-ups. I didn't understand, only that something felt wrong, that my body wanted to disappear. He laughed and said I was too serious, that I should smile more. Afterwards, he gave me candy and told me not to tell my mother because she worries too much. I didn't tell her. Not then, not for years. In our family, silence was a second language. If you said something ugly, it meant you created the ugliness. So we learned to swallow it whole, to pretend it never happened. My grandmother used to say, "Women in this family are strong." What she really meant was, we survive quietly. As I grew older, I began to notice how the women in my family moved through the world, soft-spoken, careful, apologizing for things they didn't do. They prayed before every meal and after every beating. They forgave the men before the men even asked, and I followed them, because I didn't know there was another way to be. There's a photo of me at 8 years old, standing beside my grandfather after Sunday Mass. He's smiling. I'm not. When people look at that picture, they say, "You were such a shy girl," but I wasn't shy. I was hiding. My father never asked why I flinched when someone touched me. My mother never noticed the nightmares. Maybe she did notice and chose not to see, because seeing would mean remembering her own father. It took me years to realize that what happened to me didn't start with me. It started with her, and maybe even before her. My mother came to America carrying 2 suitcases, one full of clothes, the other full of silence. She had been raised by fear of shame, fear of gossip, fear of hell. So when she saw signs in me, she folded them away neatly like laundry. She said, "Don't tell anyone. People wouldn't understand." But I think what she meant was, I can't bear to hear it. Sometimes I wonder if there's a point when pain turns into inheritance, when the hurt of one generation becomes the rule book for the next. I think that's what happened to us. We called it family, but it was really a chain. I remember the first time I tried to tell someone. I was 12. It was my friend Laura's mother. She was washing dishes, and I said something small, something about my grandfather being weird. She turned off the faucet and looked at me for a long time. Then she said, "Sweetheart, you should talk to your mom." And that was it. A door opened for a second and then slammed shut again. At home that night, my mother asked why I was crying. I told her. She froze. She whispered, "You must never repeat that. He's family." Then she hugged me too tightly, like she was trying to squeeze the words back inside. That was the night I learned that truth has a price, and in our house, it cost love. After that, I started to drift. School didn't matter. Church made me sick. When teachers asked what I wanted to be, I said, invisible. Sometimes I still smell the dust of that house when I close my eyes. The faint scent of furniture polish, the echo of Polish hymns. My mother humming while pretending nothing was wrong. Used to think forgetting would save me. Now I know it only kept me trapped. The hardest part isn't what he did, it's that everyone else stayed. I thought things would get easier when I became a teenager. They didn't. They just got louder. By the time I was 13, the house felt too small for everything I wasn't saying. I stayed outside as much as I could, not because we had some magical childhood neighborhood, but because the air outside didn't lie to me. Inside, everyone was pretending. Outside, the wind was just wind. I started noticing patterns. Not just in me, in the women. The way my mom flinched when men raised their voices. The way my grandmother would say it was different back then whenever someone hinted at what her husband had done. The way my aunt drank too fast at family dinners and then apologized for existing. It was like watching the same wound travel through different bodies. One day my mom was peeling potatoes and I asked, "Did something ever happen to you too?" She didn't even look up. She just said, "In Poland we didn't talk about those things." I said, "We're not in Poland." She said, "Doesn't matter." That was the moment I understood. This wasn't just my story. It was the family story. Silence first, truth maybe never. So I stopped trying to be the good daughter. If telling the truth made me bad, then fine. I'd be bad. At school I was quiet, but not because I was shy. I was watching. I was studying which girls were believed and which ones weren't. The loud, pretty girls could say anything. The immigrant girls, the weird girls, the too religious girls, if we said something, it became drama. I filed that away. I learned who to talk to and who never to tell. At home, I started pushing back. I didn't want to kiss every relative hello. I didn't want to sit on laps. I didn't want to stay at my grandfather's house. Each time I said no, my mother's jaw tightened. "Don't embarrass us." "Chris, he's old now, Chris. He said he's sorry." "Chris, he doesn't even remember, Chris. That one made me furious. He doesn't even remember, so he gets to forget and I have to remember for the rest of my life?" Around 14, I tried again to tell it properly. Not hints. Not he was weird. I wanted to say it clean. I waited for the right moment. Everyone calm, dinner over, TV low. I said, "Mom, what he did to you, he did to me too." She stared at me like I had slapped her. She said, "No, not you," I said. "Yes, me." She said, "He was sick back then." I said, "I was a child back then." She said, "You will destroy this family." And just like that, the roles flipped. The man who hurt kids became the one to be protected, and I became the threat. That's how families like mine work. Loyalty over safety, reputation over reality. After that, I got wilder. Not in some glamorous way, just messy. Staying out late, hanging out with older kids, saying I was at choir practice when I was actually sitting behind the convenience store with kids who also didn't want to go home. We weren't bad. We were unsupervised, angry, and pretending we didn't care. People called it acting out. It wasn't acting. It was grief, with no funeral. The more I noticed, the angrier I got. I found out my mother's younger sister had a problem with the same man. I found out one of my cousins didn't like to visit when he was around. I found out my grandmother knew decades ago and still let him stay in the house. That's when something clicked in me. This wasn't one accident. This was a system. A family-designed system to... We don't break family. God knows the truth. Yes. And so did we. That was the problem. At church, I would look around and think, if I asked every woman in here to raise her hand if a relative crossed a line, how many hands would go up? I knew the answer. I could see it in their eyes, the way they avoided some pews, the way they kept their daughters on their lap, the way they greeted old men from far away. By 15, I had 2 lives. The one my family saw, church girl, good grades, braided hair. The one in my head. I want to burn this whole lie down. I started reading about trauma, about memory gaps, about how kids' brains protect them by blurring what happened. It made me both relieved and furious. Relieved because it meant I wasn't crazy. Furious because it meant I would never have the kind of clear, court-ready memory people always demand from victims. I knew the beginning. I knew the end. The middle was fog, and I knew that was enough, but I also knew it wouldn't be enough for them. Around that time, one of my cousins had a baby girl. I watched my grandfather, old now, slow, everyone calling him poor thing, hold her. And I saw the same softness in his face that I'd seen years earlier. That was the moment my anger stopped being abstract. It became protective. I didn't just hate what he'd done to me. I hated that no one was going to stop him from doing it again. I told my mother. "He can't be alone with her," she said. "Don't start again, Chris," I said. "I'm serious," she said. "You're making things dirty that are not dirty," I said. "He made it dirty." "I was 6, she cried. I didn't. That's another thing trauma does. It switches who cries. The child dries up. The adult collapses. That night I realized something horrible. My mother wasn't choosing him over me because she loved him more. She was choosing her version of reality over mine. If she admitted he hurt me, then she would have to admit he hurt her, and that her own mother didn't protect her. That's too big for some people. So they picked the lie. That was the birth of my rage. Not the abuse itself, the cover-up. I started keeping a notebook. Not a diary, a record. Who knew? Who was there? Who said what? Who told me to stop? It made me feel sane. It made me feel like one day, if I ever spoke publicly, I wouldn't sound like a girl looking for attention. I was looking for accountability. You know what's wild? None of the men were ever afraid. They still sat at the table. They still carved the turkey. They still prayed out loud. They were confident because the women would protect them. By 17, I knew 2 things for sure. What happened to me was real. Even if I couldn't remember every second, my family was never. When I left home at 18, I thought distance would mean freedom. It didn't. It just made the silence louder. I moved 2 hours away to a small town outside Dallas. I told everyone it was for college, but really it was to breathe without the smell of my family's house in my lungs. The air there was flat, dry, empty. I liked it that way. Empty air doesn't ask you to pretend. For a while, I worked at a diner. Morning shifts, endless coffee, the sound of plates like background static. I liked watching other people's lives pass through. Mothers with kids, couples arguing softly, old men reading newspapers. I liked pretending I wasn't one of them. No one there knew my story. That was the best part. I could just be Chris, not Chris who doesn't visit her family, not Chris who makes up stories. Just Chris. The girl who refilled your coffee and smiled like she meant it, but trauma has a way of following you. It lives in the body. When a man raised his voice, my shoulders locked. When someone reached across me, I flinched. When I saw a little girl sitting on an older man's lap in the diner booth, my stomach twisted until I had to go into the kitchen to breathe. I started dating around that time, if you can call it dating. Mostly older men, the kind who liked how quiet I was. They thought I was gentle. I wasn't. I was numb. When you grow up confusing fear with attention, you can't tell the difference between safety and control. One of them, Mark, used to tell me I was mature for my age. He liked that I didn't argue. He said it made me peaceful. What he didn't know was that I had learned a long time ago that silence keeps you alive. I found a women's center through a flyer in a laundromat. It said, "Free counseling for survivors of trauma." I didn't think I was a survivor. I thought I was broken. But I went anyway. The therapist was older, gentle, and didn't flinch when I told her pieces of the story. She said something that stuck with me. "You're not reliving the past. Your body just doesn't know it's over yet." That one sentence cracked something open. I cried for the first time in years. Not pretty tears, but the kind that shake your whole body. She told me crying was a language too, a way of saying what words couldn't. Week after week, I started remembering in fragments the TV glow, the sound of his breathing, the smell of old cigarettes. The small hands that were mine. I didn't need the details to know the truth. The truth was already living under my skin. It took months before I could even say the word abuse. It felt foreign in my mouth, like a borrowed language. Every time I said it, I expected lightning to strike. But nothing happened. That's when I realized the punishment for speaking had only ever existed inside my family's mythology. Out here in the world, I could name things. I sent my mother a letter. I told her everything. How it started. How it ended. How it ruined things I never even got to have. I wasn't asking for her to fix it. I just wanted her to stop pretending. She never wrote back. She called once, though, her voice shaking. She said, "Why are you doing this to us?" I said, "I'm not. It was already done." Then she hung. That silence hurt more than anything my grandfather ever did. Because Now, it wasn't about the crime. It was about the cover-up. They would rather lose me than lose their version of peace. For a while, I spiraled. I drank too much, worked too many hours, slept too little. I kept seeing his face everywhere, in customers, in strangers, in my own reflection. But the difference now was, I wasn't pretending anymore. I started volunteering at the same center where I'd gotten help, listening to women talk about their fathers, brothers, uncles, all with the same quiet voice. By the time I turned 30, I thought I'd made peace with the past. But peace, I've learned, isn't the same as silence. It's what comes after the noise, not the absence of it. I had built a quiet life in a small apartment near the edge of Austin, a job at a community clinic, a few friends who knew enough but not everything, and a routine that made me feel stable. Coffee at 7, bus at 8, breathe at 9. Sometimes stability feels like healing, but it can also just be hiding in a prettier cage. It started unraveling one spring afternoon. A woman came into the clinic, same accent as my mother, same cautious smile. She was there for her daughter, maybe 6 years old, when the doctor asked questions. The girl wouldn't look up. Her mother said, "She's shy," and I saw it, that same word, that same lie. And suddenly I was back there, TV glow, sugar on my tongue, a man's voice saying, "Don't tell." That night I couldn't sleep. I lay awake, hearing the hum of the fridge and my own heartbeat, thinking, if I stay quiet, I'm one of them. The next morning, I called a lawyer. I didn't have evidence. I had a notebook, dates, details, fragments. The things everyone said didn't matter. But he listened. He said, "It might be too late for charges, but it's not too late for truth." Those words landed like an anchor. Not justice, maybe, but truth. I started writing, not just for him, for me. Every detail I remembered, every sentence I couldn't say out loud. I wrote about the smell of sweat and detergent, the way my mother's hands shook when she prayed, the way I measured love and survival. I wrote until my hands cramped. A few months later, I learned my grandfather was sick. Everyone said it was God's punishment, as if God waited decades to get angry. My mother called me after years of silence. Her voice was softer than I remembered. She said, "He's dying, Chris. You should come." "Say goodbye," I said. "I already did." She said, "He's still your family," I said. "He stopped being that a long time ago." That conversation burned something away. Not love, illusion. For the first time, I saw her not as my mother, but as another woman trapped by loyalty, and I forgave her. Not because she deserved it, but because I didn't want her silence living in me anymore. I went to the hospital anyway. Not for him, for me. He looked small, wrapped in tubes and blankets, eyes half open like he was already halfway gone. When he saw me, he smiled. He said my name like it was still his to say, and something inside me went still. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I just said, "I remember." He blinked. Maybe confused, maybe not. Then I said, "You don't get to die clean." And I walked out. After that, the nightmares stopped, not immediately, but slowly, like the air in the room had changed. The weight I'd been carrying all those years, the secret that didn't belong to me, finally started to lift. But healing is strange. You expect light, and I used to think survival was the finish line, that if I just stayed alive long enough, the pain would eventually stop echoing. But it doesn't really stop. It just changes its rhythm. The sound becomes quieter, softer, something you can almost live with. Almost. In my mid-30s, I began rebuilding everything from the ground up. I moved again, this time to a coastal town in Oregon. Gray skies, quiet mornings, and people who didn't know my last name. I wanted a place where nobody carried the ghosts of my family. I rented a small studio above a bookstore. From my window, I could see the ocean. The waves reminded me of therapy, always coming back, never exactly the same. I started painting. Not well, not beautifully, but honestly. Every canvas was a different version of silence. Storm gray, bruise blue, smoke white. At first, I thought I was painting grief. Then I realized I was painting release. The local art teacher, a woman named June, saw my work and asked if I wanted to join her community class. I said no, then yes, then no again, because joining things still felt dangerous. But I went, and something strange happened. Nobody asked what happened to me. They just handed me brushes and coffee and talked about the tide. For the first time in my life, being quiet didn't mean hiding. It was around then that I reconnected with my sister. We hadn't spoken in nearly 15 years. Her voice over the phone was older, tired, but warm. She said, "I heard about him," I said. "He's gone." She said, "I know. I just wanted to say I believe you." That one sentence broke me in a way nothing else ever had, because that's all I had ever wanted. Not justice. Not revenge, just belief. We talked for hours about the house, the secrets, the way our mother used to hum hymns when she was scared. We didn't talk about forgiveness. We didn't need to. Sometimes just naming the same ghosts is enough to start setting them free. After that, I began recording my story, not for YouTube, not for a court, not even for therapy, for history, for every person who will one day think, maybe it's just me. I spoke into a small microphone in my kitchen, my voice steady. No tears left. It felt less like confession and more like reclamation. The words were mine now, not his, not theirs. One night I listened back and heard something I didn't expect. Calm. Not joy, not closure, but a calm that came from finally standing on my own. Narrative. That was when I realized the story wasn't about what happened. It was about what I became after. I started giving talks at local schools, not dramatic. Speeches, just conversations about boundaries, consent, and why secrets rot everything they touch. Sometimes the students laughed nervously, sometimes they cried. Every time, I left the room a little lighter. The silence that used to choke me had turned into air I could share. Then came the hardest part, seeing my mother again. She called one morning. Her voice fragile, she said, "I'm sorry. Not for everything. Just for something."